We're ready to resume our meeting. We are on item number F under new business, Adult Charter High Schools A to F accountability, approval for proposed rule. Approval for proposed rule LSA document number 14-508. That would be actually the motion to approve a proposed rule LSA document 14-508. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes. Yay. Yes. Put money in the parking meter.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Next item on the agenda is turnaround funding for TSOs and lead partners. You have an actual process for that, and the motion before us today would be to approve the proposed funding for Title I priority and focus schools. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
If I could,
And then we'll have discussion.
okay. Go.
Is that all right? Are you going to
Just
second?
move it forward, yeah.
Okay, so now we're in discussion. And Charlie and Teresa from our title division, if you would, I know you have a very brief PowerPoint that goes along with, it just really is clarifying or making sure that you understand everything in the actual process on how this would occur. Teresa?
Right, so the department's making a recommendation basically on the process. In looking at the schools that are currently under intervention, we know that treating them all equally and giving the same funding like we have in the past for each tier isn't necessarily giving them the equity or funding actually their needs that they have. So to us it made sense to say, here we usually give you about 70% of our Title A money to use for the intervention schools. So in looking at that, saying, instead of us telling you kind of how it should play out for those intervention schools, because they're all in a different trajectory at this point, it maybe makes more sense just to give you that whole pot of money and say, you let us know what makes sense for your schools. How would you like to allocate that money within that up to $7 million? So ran that idea by Mr. Guffin. He thought it was a good idea. We still have to work out probably some of the process issues, but we gave you our proposal today. It's our recommendation on how that could look. And Charlie's also put together some slides to talk about the different tiers so you understand kind of how that methodology went into play. The bottom line is the department realizes that we still have the responsibility, the federal responsibility, to monitor the federal grants and this money. So, of course, we would continue to do that. We would continue to provide support to the schools, to the state board staff as they're also implementing the grants, and then also monitoring the funds throughout the year, which we currently do. We also have outreach staff that visit each one of these schools at least each month and do classroom walkthroughs and prepare monitoring reports. So obviously we would continue all of those things in a very robust way. But this is just to give you an idea that we're just kind of looking at a way to make things easier and to allow you to do what you want to do within your schools, basically.
Charlie?
Yeah, so the slides are pretty simple. It just gives the background of how 1003A works and what we've done historically. So 1003A dollars are used for focus and priority schools. Tier 1 is what we refer to as state board intervention. And then Tier 2 or more tiers, last year we had 4, are based on research and menu options that are aligned to our turnaround principles. So this is what was done in 2014-15. Roughly $7 million was given towards SBOE intervention. Tier 2, we had 4 schools that had 4 years of F, and we allocated a total of $500,000 for those schools. Tier 3, there were 12 schools with $600,000 given to them. And then our 4th tier, we opened up an opportunity for all focus on priority schools to participate using advanced ed with the school improvement planning process, including diagnostic reviews. And we had 121 schools take us up on that offer, which came up to about a $2 million expenditure. This is just over time. You can see how dollars were expended for all schools that are in part of the SBOE intervention, just to stay in the facts of how the dollars have gone. This year, the 70% would go to you all and saying, okay, here is what we believe needs to happen. The schools would fill out a pre-application, which was in your packet, to expedite the approval process through the grant that would be released once we have final numbers of our Title I allocation. Right now, it's all just estimates.
So Charlie, just a
yes.
clarification. First of all, make sure the board gets a copy of this electronically.
yeah.
Okay, I know it's reiterating what you
Yeah,
already
yeah,
have
exactly
in the plan.
right. Yeah, it just simplifies
but
it.
it's
That's
just
fine.
in a nice format.
No problem.
And these are the continued 12 schools then that will be for next year.
Correct.
Okay,
With Arlington, yeah, going back to it, yes.
correct. So Arlington would not be on the list then? Okay.
Then the 30% would remain with department, and we would do a tier process again. We'd have basically 289 schools that would be eligible. How that would be tiered out is to be determined. There would be priorities and things we'd be considering, and so we'll wait and see. And so once again, just the best practices with grant conditions. We're focusing on practices, policies, and procedures that are sustainable. These are one-year grants, and so you want to make sure that you're making an investment that isn't something that can't be hopefully sustained. Focus on intervention, make sure that it's equitable, being conservative. We do consider a funding cap of sorts and a gradual release of funding so schools are not relying on these dollars. We do a menu of approach with research-based interventions. We do create networks, which means we bring these schools together to think. Many times they're having very similar issues, and so we bring them together to discuss and to work together. And then we maximize our monitoring accountability, and we believe the method this year will allow us to do even a better job at doing that. So that's just reiterating everything, kind of the infrastructure of the proposal.
Yes, PJ?
Is this the grant that you can only receive, is the 1003A grant, the only can receive it like 3 years?
That would be G,
That's G,
and that's
okay.
a competitive process, and so we're working
So
on that
this one
application
is,
now.
as long as you fit the parameters, there's no,
Correct. The
And
SEA
there's no
has the
timeline.
ability to
Okay.
decide what those parameters are, and we use a tier-based method, with tier 1 being state board intervention, and so an investment is made into that tier, and then additional tiers as decided by department.
Quick comment.
Brad?
This is probably the third consecutive time since I've been on board this issue's come up, and I just want to keep making this appeal to the department. We've had a subcommittee of the board looking at the whole school turnaround, and I know there's only one tier in here in which the school board really has statutory responsibilities. But when you're talking about scarce resources, I think it would be better if we had more collaborative conversation. And to use the words that were expressed just a minute ago, basically a decision was made, basically a policy decision was made about how to resource tier 1. And I appreciate that Bob was consulted or asked for his input, but it's not the same as recognizing that we've had a group looking at this. We've got a strategic planning committee of the board that's looking at strategic goals. And I guess this is really for the superintendent to say, going forward, and I'm going to keep asking this every year, why can't we have more conversation? I don't know if they're right or wrong. I mean, I feel denied the opportunity to talk about how we resource something that the board has responsibilities over, because as I read the document that was sent, essentially to me, how it reads to me is this is what's already been communicated to the feds, and I would expect that the response from the department would be that it's not been. So the document that we have is it's just a proposal. So what we're acting on today is open to a total conversation then.
What do you want to ask?
Well, I guess the larger conversation is how, you've mentioned that you've communicated with Bob, but the question I have is that what is the timeline in which this has to happen? Because when this was sent to us, it wasn't communicated that this is up for a conversation. It was communicated that this is the recommendation, here's the slides on what we're doing, and it feels like the board's just being asked to approve it, and all I'm saying is, this is where I miss the days when we would have a little bit of a work session to talk about things. I'm not asking for a work session right now. I'm just saying it doesn't seem like in the meeting where we need to move the meeting along and take action that we should be inserting a work session conversation about how do we resource larger.
So let me clarify. So in the past, we've actually brought recommendations to you about the amount of money to be spent on each school. We do that every April, okay? Rather than the department bringing to you our specific recommendations regarding each individual school and how we proceed, how we would like to actually allocate those monies. We are instead saying to the board, here's your pot of money, and we want you to approve the process to go forward with, because then the schools are you're gonna start to the schools only get this money based upon their 1003 application. And so we want to begin that process and then share that with you, and then you allocate the money that goes to each of the entities. So we're actually doing what it is that you've requested in your small group meetings on turnaround, to have more input, so to say, on how you spend the dollars. So rather than us giving it to you on here's how we see it being allocated, we're saying here's the pot of money and you may proceed. BJ?
If I could, and this may help, I'm going to make a motion to amend this to where we approve, because I agree with what you're saying, I understand. This is the starting point, and I think there needs to be conversation with us, with SBOE staff, with DOE staff, as to how all of this process works. So my motion is going to be that we approve the 70%, and then we bring the actual process back after all of those conversations. Because I concur that when in the meeting, it should be come in, it's approved, we have the action. Those conversations, and I guess that's a question for I'm not sure who, it would, if we pull out the process, just approve the 70% and pull out the process, bring it back on May 7th, does that affect the timeline in any way?
I mean, sure, that can work. The process for us is, since it's a federal grant, we have to have an application. Right? So whatever you guys decide how those dollars are going to those schools, to what activities, those activities have to be allowable, right, by the grant, but then they have to fill out the application. What we've given you here is a pre-application or pre-planning, right? So we can see here are the things that the board is considering.
Absolutely.
So that when the application is released, it's expedited, we can get this thing done as quickly as possible. So from our standpoint, we have to have an application, we have to have a system in which we release these dollars. Here's the system, and here's the application.
And it was our intention to provide obviously flexibility. That was what
We thought you would want to actually
Right.
see what it is that they want to spend their dollars on, and how that impacts
they
your
normally do
decisions.
this is the same thing.
Sarah?
If I may, I think part of the conversation that needs to occur also before any kind of final allocation per school, we have a variety of schools that are receiving intervention services right now. And in some of them, we're seeing great success. Looking at Broad Ripple, for example, where we have 3 years of Bs, and we need to at some point be having the conversation of how are we on the back end of this? How are we going to eventually release them? And is it still appropriate for them to be receiving the same amount as well? And I think a big part of that conversation is building a plan with the school on the back end. We're seeing the success. How are you going to sustain this in coming years? And I think that conversation on all the schools needs to occur before we can start putting a dollar amount to each. So I would actually request at our next meeting that we kind of receive a formulated report of all of the schools that are involved at this process. Where are we at? How close are we to some sort of an exit strategy with them? And what do we need to see in order to make that happen? What needs to come to us to give us the confidence to know that these schools can maintain that level of success? And I think that's really important for us to have before we are actually putting a specific dollar amount with each of the schools under this jurisdiction.
Tony?
Why will Arlington not be on the list?
They're not, according to Mr. Guffin, when I talked to him, he said since they were transitioning back to IPS, they could come off of that list. And so obviously they're still under your intervention, and so you can still choose to fund them. They're
Yeah,
just not
I
seen as a separate
If I could just follow up on that, I think even though they're transitioning back, they're obviously still going to be in need of support. They're still going to be technically a turnaround school under SBOE jurisdiction. So I don't think that they should be removed from the funding list just because of their transitioning back.
Yeah, I probably miscommunicated with, or was misunderstood, but we think Arlington needs to be included in the funding in some way, and that's something that details can be worked out over the course of the next month, once you determine what the total amount of the funds are.
Dan?
Thank you. I want to pick up on Ms. O'Brien's comment. It's right on. For instance, where we've intervened with schools, they're in all different places. It's very conceivable, matter of fact, I haven't done the detail, but take a look at a Broad Ripple, they're getting B grades. Maybe their last grant is a transition grant, how do they solidify their gains? So maybe even next fall, as soon as I'd be open to looking at, get that back under IPS board. I mean, they've made tremendous progress. I remember visiting that school before we intervened, and it just seems like it's really going a different direction now. So I want to know all the schools where they've earned, what variables, because we might want to give them a heads up, say, hey, if this keeps going this way, we got to transition this back. If maybe your last grant is to solidify some gains, how they're going to use it to get it back. I want to pick up on that and emphasize.
I do have a question, though. I agree with that as far as getting reports back, but this process is for application to the grant.
Right. Yeah.
So what we're approving is the application to the grant. If we do this, that would not be part of the grant application.
Not necessarily, but what you're applying for in substance, what you use the money for, might actually help with that transition, is what I'm saying. How you apply
I
it.
don't disagree, but as far
I
as
understand, those are two.
this is kind of an add-on at the end that I think that what we're trying to do is, if I was in this tier 1 for the first year, this is my application process.
Right.
And I think that that's what we're trying to approve today. I may be speaking out of turn, but I think that's where we're at. And I think that what we're discussing now is things that may be put into that application by the schools that are in multiple years.
Precisely. We're on the same page, and that's why I wanted to bring it up, frankly. That's going to be a different, when they apply for the grant, it's going to be a different process. I want them to even be thinking about making the case, say, hey, with this SIG grant, we see solidifying our gains with this money. Here's how we're going to use it, because we're going to come. Our goal is now to move off of that because of our progress.
So I did
we're on
understand
the
it.
same page.
I did understand that correctly then.
We're inextricably intertwined here. These grants are to help you get out of intervention.
Correct,
And
correct,
so
correct.
if we're at your application process, hey, frankly, Dr. Fair will be able to decide, but if he looks at data I'm looking at, they're probably gonna say, I think we're ready. Here's how we're gonna use it to cross the bridge back to normalcy, let's call it, because we're there. And so I want people who receive this process to know we're gonna be looking at the data, how we would apply the resource. And that's where I think it's good, because the board does have responsibility with schools. I'm basically magnifying and supporting Ms. O'Brien's position on this, and I want to be ready to do that if it's possible.
David?
We've been talking about the 70% or approximately $7 million. My question is, where's the other 30%, $3 million?
Yeah,
Go
so
back.
last year, what we did was we looked at schools and trying to echo things that have been talked about, is to prevent state board intervention, right? And say these are schools that may have 4 years of F or 3 years of F. Here's an investment into those schools aligned to the turnaround principles that we know are research-based and that can prevent intervention and that are meeting needs. And to think about meeting needs that are sustainable, and also knowing that it's only a 1-year, grant opportunity, not guaranteed. And so we tiered those out. Tier 2 was 4 years of F, Tier 3 was 3 years of F, and then the last tier was focused on school improvement, planning, and that process. And so we offered that up to all focus and priority schools, which these dollars are allowed to be used in. And we had 121 schools take us up on that opportunity. And so that's how they were used last year. They've always been done on a tier basis of some kind on preventing schools reaching state board intervention, but aligned to turnaround principles and research-based interventions.
And out of those 121 that took advantage of it, how many of those were able to jump off the spiraling downward?
That was just this year. So, we're doing that process right
So-
now. We're
so
tracking
we're
and
unsure.
working with them.
And what was the mechanism for providing the intervention component for those particular 121 schools? What form does it take? How do we do that?
So we partner with Advanced Ed. And so Advanced Ed, what we've worked with them is looking at the school improvement process, and we're combining the idea of the PL 221 the Title I plan, and the Student Achievement Plan, which are all working towards similar goals and streamlining, reducing redundancy, and providing support, technical assistance, and professional development around a high-quality school improvement plan.
So as I hear the motion that was presented is to have this go back to staff to make a recommendation. It's my understanding. I would hope that not only do we talk about the 70%, but that 30%. I think we need to drill down and look at the entire amount of money. And is that possible, or is there a challenge to that?
So it's the SEA's responsibility to allocate Title I funds, and the SIG funds are a part of that. We understand that the intervention schools need to be funded, and so we've tried to do that in a very robust way by giving you 70% of that $10 million. But then the other money is reserved for us to support our focus on priority schools, and that's an SEA responsibility. And the feds
So-
require us to monitor
But
them
you're
as
saying the
well.
federal government mandates that we spend the money in that way that you're spending it? Or don't we have flexibility
For
as a
focus
state
on
board?
priority schools.
But don't we have the flexibility to determine what's the best strategy to deal with those schools?
As an SEA, yes, we do, and that's the process that we've outlined for you.
According to
The department.
the department,
The department is the SEA.
well, I understand that. So you declared it 70-30?
Go ahead.
Pardon?
Yes,
The
we've looked-
4%, the 4%
We
that we're required.
start back with the amount of money that's supposed to be, that we can set
So you-
aside.
It's outlined in the front page of the
Of the plan.
of your plan. So you have X amount of Title I dollars, 4% can come off for 1003A activities. The SA determines how those dollars, which is roughly $10 million, are allocated to focus and priority schools. What we're saying is we've traditionally done a tier process, with Tier 1 being state board intervention. You've historically had around $7 million to do the work. $3 million has been then allocated to Tiers 2, 3, and beyond by the DOE to prevent state board intervention. And so what we're saying is, instead of us saying, here's how you may do your Tier 1, we're saying, state board, here's the $7 million historically have had. How do you want to do it?
Well,
Through the
my question
application
is, if the
process.
federal government is not mandating the particular approach that we're using, why are we limiting ourselves to the 70%? Why aren't we looking at the entire amount of money? And I'm not saying I want to change. All I'm saying is I just want information and have the flexibility to look at the strategy and to say, maybe we want to reallocate some of that money to do something else. I see Bob standing behind you.
So Teresa, tell us how many focus and priority schools we have total.
We have nearly 300.
So we have nearly 300 schools that are focus and priority, and we have saved just 30% of what we've allotted for turnaround work to serve the majority of those schools. And so for 12 schools, we're allowing $7 million to be spent for just 12 schools, which is some pretty hefty money, actually, because we are only using the 30% to serve all the rest of the focus and priority of schools.
So you're making my point. I think maybe we need to re-examine that. And all, I'm not asking for an argument today about the merits of how to use the money. I'm just saying, shouldn't there be a process for us to look at the money, look at the results, and then maybe readjust some of that? And I hear that it may be a Department of Ed responsibility,
It is.
but I see a role for a State Board of Education because of the turnaround schools, that we need to play a role in that. And so what I'm asking for is that maybe it goes back to our staff, and at the next meeting it comes back and we have a broader discussion of what the priorities should be.
If I could, we are really in agreement that this year, that 70% number is sufficient to fund all of the intervention schools for the board, including the potential for those who are coming in. There's 6 of them on the list. Probably all of them will not move into intervention. And I think what we're talking about here is a policy decision on, is that 70% the right number? Should it be more or less? And what is the way that the department goes about spending whatever's left out of whatever number the board determines, 70%, 80%, 60%, So I'm going to recommend that you adopt that, or that you vote to approve that 70% number. We really think it's sufficient for intervention, and that you then recommend that the two staffs get together and talk through the process and bring that process back to you as a joint recommendation. We think that we are we'll be able to work through that with Teresa and I.
Can I make a quick comment? I don't have any problem with that, Bob, but I want to express something to everybody that's here because I don't want to be misunderstood either, okay? Because I appreciate what you're doing. All I'm saying is this is the third cycle in which this issue has come before the board. This isn't the first time the board has commented on this. All I'm saying is that when we get a document like this, there is not a link between a rationale as to why it's 70-30 aligned to a set of board directives about what we were trying to achieve. It's just, we think it's fair because we got X number of schools, so we're going to give them 30%, and there's a lot of, I mean, we're doing, and that's not the right way in my mind we should come at that. To me, we should go back and talk about what did we say we needed to do for the kids in those schools. And I don't know, maybe 70-30 is right, but there's not an underlying rationale that explains why that amount at 70, because I made this argument last year. What if it's too much? What if we should have sent 40% to all the schools that Superintendent Ritz is talking about and only reserved 60% for the handful of schools? My point is that we are lacking a critical conversation, and with all due respect, I know we've said we're going to kick it to staff. I don't understand why we don't have a work session, at least philosophically, to come to listen to what the folks who have studied this have said as to why we know why we do things at 70-30, because I could make the argument that it may be too high at 70%.
Can I respond to that?
Teresa, yes.
Yeah. So when we said the 70%, that's because we went back and we looked at past practice on the
Historical.
funding level, right? So that's where we came up with that. So it wasn't an arbitrary number. So if you notice in the proposal to you, it says up to 70%. And what I indicated to Bob when I talked to him is, look at your schools, see what your needs are for your interventions, and then you tell us what number you need up to 70%. Right. So maybe you need 60%. That would be great. Then we would have more to use for the other schools. So that's your call.
And I know your number wasn't arbitrary, and I understand you looked at historical. All I'm saying is that if you go back and look at the history, there probably wasn't a rationale then as to why that number got set. That's my point. And I'm just saying a better way to resource this is to say, what is it you're trying to achieve, and then how do you resource it to get it done? I'd feel a whole lot better setting that number and then making decisions about how to split it up between the schools in that pool of money, rather than just saying, well, historically we've always said schools in this bucket get 70%. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. I also know that the board directed us last year, and I heard several conversations throughout the year, that they wanted to maintain the level of funding that they had given their schools. And I heard that said by the board a couple of different times about, that they needed to make sure that they built in the sustainability, and they didn't want us taking back the funds, right? So that's why we said historically this is what's been proposed. So like if we just said up to 70%.
I'm not arguing with what you did. I totally understand it. I just want you to understand, I'm encouraging my colleagues, let's aspire to a better way to do this process.
Sarah?
If I may, and I don't want to speak for you, so tell me if I'm completely off base here, but I think what Brad is asking for and what would be beneficial for us is if in the future on topics such as this, we were to have this item as a discussion topic the month before a vote would be needed.
Thank you.
And that way we would be able to flesh out some of this before we're actually expected to take a vote on it. So I think just as a matter of process, that would be beneficial.
Thank you.
Can I go back and ask Teresa a question?
BJ?
Do you have the freedom now to, let's say we set aside the 70%, the $7.1 million, and you spend 6.5. Do you have the freedom to take that other $600,000 and spend it on those priority schools?
Sure, absolutely. We are required to use that money for focus and priority schools. So anything you don't spend on your intervention schools will absolutely go to those focus and priority schools.
There's no red tape in your way to
No, we use the waiver to guide us on how that is implemented. So the waiver actually is our plan when we talk about the processes. If you look at the tiered approach and the advanced ed and the school improvement, all of that's included in our waiver as being initiatives to kind of guide the improvement process. And we have had some really good results up to this point.
Thank you.
Troy?
I just want to ask Charlie. Charlie, this is an improvement of the application process. Delaying this, does that affect schools in any way?
In terms of the school improvement process delay? No. So the status of focus and priority would have been based on the current grade they have right now. So we don't have to wait for new data to particularly come in. What we do know is that our final allocation will become available July 1 to schools. And so the goal is to always release 1003A as quickly as you can so that implementation can begin as early in July as possible, which is why we're saying we need to start this process now. And the pre-application is part of that so that when we do release the final application, we can expedite that, get those dollars, because they're only available from that July 1 or when we get the application that's in sustainably approvable form. So if they happen to send us on September 1, well, they can only retro back to September 1 when we receive the application. So it's the opportunity to get it for schools to submit as early as possible, and those funds are available until the following September 30th of the next year. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
BJ?
I make a motion that we approve the DOE's recommendation of 70% for SIG 1003A funds and move the processes and roles out of that, take it back to where DOE staff and SBOE staff get together and bring those processes and roles back to us on May 7th.
So let's back up.
Okay.
So let's back up, because we already have a motion and a second on the
So should it
floor.
be an amendment? I'm sorry.
So it's a motion to approve the proposed funding for Title I priority and focus schools. So it does say funding. So it says a motion to approve the proposed funding for Title I priority and focus schools. So I think you're, so I
Which
think,
is
I think you're fine.
Okay.
I just wanted to
Should
go
I do
back
it
to
as
the
an
original
amendment
motion.
rather than a motion?
No, I think we're fine with
amendment
the
to the
motion,
original
because the
motion, okay.
motion is really about the funding, okay? And so you said a second. We had a first and a second. And so do we need any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Mr. Elder?
Yay.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritt?
Yes. Next item is the I-STEP remediation, prevention remediation distribution. You received this information under the discussion item. So I would, and you received a memo followed by several pages of distribution of money. And we need an approval to move forward with the distribution. Michelle?
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz. Members of the board, this is an annual process where we actually look at the proficiency of students in the prior year's I-STEP assessment, including the ECAs, and actually use a formula to determine the amount of dollars that will be provided for remediation. And you're the first stop. The next step will be the State Budget Committee in April. Actually, this month, I guess, since today's the first. So you have before you two actual sets of paperwork. The first one is for I-STEP in grades 3 through 8. And there are 3 tiers. The first tier is for students who are actually performing the furthest from the cut score. And then the second tier is closer to the cut score, and then finally tier 3. So again, the funds are generated by students who actually have scored a do not pass in any of the content areas that are assessed on I-STEP. The second set of paperwork is actually for the GQ.
If you don't mind, let's do
Oh,
one and
so
then the
sorry.
other. We put them
Yes.
separately on the
Yes.
agenda.
Sorry.
So there is a motion to approve the I-STEP remediation, preventative remediation distribution. And do I have did I already do a second?
No.
Yeah, do I have a second? Thank you. Any discussion?
Just question,
Yes.
on the 3 million, is that an amount that's set by appropriation, or how do we arrive at the total number?
So it's actually part of the testing and remediation budget,
Okay.
separate from the GQE, which we'll talk about next,
Right.
which is a separate line item. So one of the things that we're actually working toward for next school year is actually asking for additional funds for that particular line item, so.
But if the lawmaker asks me, why did we approve
Oh.
$3 million, what do I tell them?
That's actually been the amount we've used in the last 3 years. So it's
Hasn't
been
changed.
built into our budget.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Albert?
Yes.
Mr. Elder?
Yay.
Dr. Freitas?
Yes.
Ms. Neal?
Yes.
Mrs. O'Brien?
Yes.
Dr. Oliver?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Mr. Watts?
Yes.
Superintendent Ritt?
Yes. GQE remediation grant distribution is the next item.
Thank you, Superintendent Ritz. Members of the board, this is for the ECAs in Algebra 1 and English 10. This is for first-time test takers who actually scored and did not pass. And the money is equally divided for English and math in terms of, we actually funded at $148.38 this year. This particular amount, kind of back to Dr. Oliver's question about the I-STEP remediation, this amount is actually a specific line item in the budget, so that amount doesn't change from year to year. What does change, obviously, are the number of students who are scoring below that did not pass, and then we use those total dollars to determine how much each student actually generates per site. So the list that you see before you are those sites who actually had students not passing and the allocations for those.
Thank you. David, question?
How many years have we been doing this? Several?
Oh, wow.
Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
And we're investing $5 million essentially every year. What's the data on the results of investing $5 million?
What I would say, and I don't know that this would actually be causation, let's just say that as we move forward each year, looking at the percent of students who are proficient, which I think is really where you're headed.
Right.
As we look at first-time test takers who were not proficient, and then as they take it the next time around, each time it's about half of the students that are passing each time as the group gets smaller and smaller. So I think you're really asking about return on investment, which many moons ago, when I actually was a corporation test coordinator, we did a formal study, the department did, and looked at the types of remediation and actually kind of what differences those made. Certainly it's a local decision how they address the learning needs of every student. So I think your question is a good one, and thinking more, my brain usually goes more to prevention and do remediation if needed, but it's interesting, the I-STEP 1438 is called the Remediation and Preventive Remediation Grant. So I don't know if I've answered your question. I've given lots of information, but I don't know how long. I don't know how many years.
Yeah, you're saying the investment is well worth it. And I just want to make the point that as we look at potentially less money going to education, that I think we have to be wise and ready to have data available, so if this comes up in a budget discussion, that we can point to some tangible data that says, yes, it does make a difference. Right. And so do you have any plans to do?
And we actually, so we're tracking actually of the retesters, what percent are proficient. So we are monitoring that information to make sure that students are actually given the opportunity to participate in the assessment and hopefully demonstrating proficiency.
Because the cohorts of students going through is ever-changing. At some point they graduate, so it's hard to do a year-by-year comparison. So are you able to do a cohort-by-cohort
That's actually
analysis?
how we look at it, is the group of students moving through. So, yes.
And the results are positive, is what you're saying?
They are. They're not as high as I want them to be, but yes.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
David, I want to address that just a minute, because in the last meeting and in our minutes of our last meeting, it did show a significant decrease in the number of waivers, which would indicate that that would be a great indicator as the success of the remediation money.
Excellent point.
Good, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. So now we have a motion, to approve the GQE remediation grant distribution. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call, please.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to ask the board's pleasure. The lunch has arrived, but I feel like we could probably end a pretty good time and take our lunch with us if we wanted to. So you prefer to keep going?
Yes.
All right. So we're ready for discussion and report. State Board of Ed staff, do you have anything? Okay. Advanced placement report. You received the report. Leslie Fathom from the department is here if you have questions. Leslie? All right, David?
I did have a few questions.
More money.
It's always about the money, right? Follow the money. Is that what you're saying? I was really impressed with some of the things you had in your report. Number one is the predictive data that students who take the AP test in particular do well in college. And so there are a lot of positive results. So first of all, I want to thank everyone who's involved, school leaders and so forth. My question deals with the percentage of students who take an AP class and did not pass it. And I believe the statistic from, I read it last week, was 18% pass. Of the 36% who take it, 18% pass. So we're at about a 50% pass rate.
I think that was just for, it's the 18% was the percentage of graduates, high school graduates. So the class of 2014. Actually, if you look at the percent passing of all the exams taken, it's 50%.
Okay.
It's over 50%.
And that's what I was getting. It was 50.8%,
Yeah.
I believe, of students who take an AP class pass it.
Well, it's 50% of the exams
Fif-
earned a qualifying
Some people
score.
take it
So
and don't
students may
take it.
take more than
Yes.
one AP exam,
Okay.
and they
Okay.
often do.
It's a tough exam.
So,
So my question deals with, and that may be a positive statistic, but my initial reaction was, what are we doing to try to have that percentage increase? Is that something we should be looking at as a priority?
oh, yes, and
What's the
it,
plan?
well, it actually is, because if you look at the percent of qualifying scores, that's going up, so that means that individual students are doing better on the exams as well. If you look at the demographics, for instance, you'll see that this is looking at individual students and how they scored, and the percents are definitely going up. We're getting many more 3, 4s, and 5s than we did just a few years ago. So all students are actually doing better. Some students are not showing the growth and improvement that we would like, and so that's something that, I would like to address that. So minority students, in particular black
Right.
students, are not doing as well. And I don't know the reasons, so I put in some speculative considerations, but that's something that going forward next year, I am going to try to focus on that and see if I can find out what the cause is and if there's anything that we can do to improve.
Yeah, I would ask you that you make that a priority along with the achievement gap between minorities and others. There was some statistics there that looked like we need to pay attention. My other question deals with these AP classes being brought to our universities. And I know that Purdue University is encouraging students to finish in 3 years, and there's many other universities who are doing the same kind of thing. And I was wondering, do you keep any data on that of students who take their AP courses to a university in Indiana, and whether that decreases the amount of time that they take to get to their baccalaureate degree?
You're talking about students who earn AP credit
In high school.
in high school?
They bring that to the university. Has that had a positive effect on the amount of time they spend at our colleges and
Well,
universities?
I'm not sure, but I could find out working with CHE. They would give me the best information on that. I'm sure it's something that College Board does track. I mean, I know they calculate the college hours that have been earned by its students who take and pass an AP exam, and they even turn that into a monetary figure. I'm not sure if that's actually borne out through that student's college career, but probably College Board is tracking that somehow, as well as CHE is probably tracking it. You know, we don't really go into the university sphere as far as data collection, so.
Maybe we can break down those two silos, right?
Yeah.
And work on this. I think it's really important because one of your goals is to increase participation, as I read your report. And so if I'm a parent sitting in South Bend, Indiana, and I see I can save maybe $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on my son's or daughter's tuition, by promoting these AP classes. I think that would be a really positive incentive. So I would ask you to get that information, maybe send it to me, and then maybe share that with school districts.
Yeah, we're seeing the same thing with dual credit as well.
Same thing.
And in
right?
fact, there's kind of a competition going on between AP and dual credit that is interesting.
Okay, thank you.
Dan?
Very
Andrew,
good. I can tell you anecdotally, of course, Marion's such a great place, they don't want to leave early. But I can tell you anecdotally, one student this year, it's a senior who's really only been there 3 years, been accepted to multiple medical schools. He'll be out a year earlier, earns money, one less year of tuition. So it can be quite a deal for really sharp, dedicated students. But the larger point, I want to connect a couple dots here real quick before we leave. When we talked about spending this money, either the SIG grants or the remediation grants, this is a good place where I want to connect dots. When you divide up all the money and 5,000 goes to school and 3,000 and 10,000 here, I would like to lay down how we spend money against our strategic plan and the goals we have in there. And strategically go after, for instance, if we have gaps between different segments of students, is there a way we can collaborate on a professional development program to eliminate it? Eliminate it. Yeah, eliminate it. That's, I think, our goal. Everybody achieves at the same level. Or if we have some things in math, I think just dividing up money is never going to be, we're worried about money on assessment. But we worry about how we spend money to improve and lay it against the this is what excellent organizations do and boards should do. Not that we'll divide each school up, but we will give clear direction. Here's our strategic direction, and here's big pots of money. How do we focus it in a way that's highly efficient and effective and measurable? So I was just connecting the dots to these conversations, and I know our comments are between lunch, so I wanted to make it, record it in the minutes, and see if we could take up on it. Thank you.
I'd also like to add that the International Baccalaureate Program is an excellent program, and you see the same kinds of results of kids who obtain an IB diploma.
Andrea?
Maybe it already exists. I would love to see a chart that showed both raw numbers and percentage growth in all AP scoring levels, 1 through 5. There's no 0, right?
Right.
And maybe that document exists, but I'd like to see how, as more and more students have taken the exam, how the 1s and the 2s are looking.
Okay, well, I can do that. I can just take the data from, well, the past 3 reports that I've written.
I think that'd be very useful. I also want to make sure I understand the various benefits to schools of increasing participation. I know they benefit under A to F, but is there a financial benefit to schools to increasing AP participation?
Well, through the academic honors and diploma, there is, because schools do get money for each one of those diplomas that they award. Other than that, I don't know that it's specific to AP, and that's not specific to AP because there are other ways for
Who pays
students
for
to
those
earn
AP
that.
exams right now?
If it's math or science, the state pays for it for juniors and seniors. If it's a low-income student taking a subject other than math or science, there's a federal grant that covers most of it, and the state has been picking up the remainder, which is a small amount.
So for non-math and science, non-low income, is that paid by the family or the school system?
It's paid typically by the student's parents. Some schools, I mean, they can use their academic honors diploma, THD diploma money for that. They can also use high ability funds if the students are identified as high ability. So
Okay.
I think it differs between schools.
Thank
know.
you. And what's the cost of an AP exam?
Right now, this year, it's $91.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Leslie. Next item is update from the Career Council Core 40 Subcommittee. You received a paper, I think, as an update from Teresa Lubbers and I regarding our work. We had a very robust meeting yesterday on March 31st, and so just a little update on that. We are having we had a side-by-side looking at the general and diploma and the Core 40 diploma and the advanced diplomas. We have worked our way through a great deal of the mathematics. It has taken a really long time to talk about mathematics flexibility within our coursework. And so we are to that point where we're actually looking at things. We're still having a conversation as to whether we might be able to have just one Core 40 kind of piece going forward. So that means that we have to consider the students that we're getting general diplomas and what does that mean and how does that look. So we've got a very robust committee. Oh my goodness, it's very eclectic. We have 2-year colleges represented, 4-year colleges represented. We have career, we have industry, we have the department, we have CTE coordinators. It's a very large committee, subcommittee. We were working in separate little group task forces. We are now back to a whole committee effect, and so we are moving forward. And I think in the timeline, yes, the timeline was included in there in order to make sure that we're getting more information to you. And as we get to the point where we're actually wanting to get some stakeholder input, we will be giving you very specific kind of information so that you have that to take a look at as we move forward. So it's a great committee. Accountability update, Michelle. I think she wants to, Michelle is the interim director of accountability at the department. Deb Daly has moved on to another opportunity, and we are pleased that we have Michelle in here for the interim, and she wants to talk to you about the rulemaking and where we are.
And actually, Cynthia is working with the department, representing board staff on the rulemaking, which will actually be reporting more to you in May. And also, there was a memo in your packet about the graduation rate audit. Certainly, we're in the process right now of receiving information from sites who are either required or are voluntarily wanting us to do an audit of their information in terms of their graduation rate. So if the school actually had a difference of more than 5% between what their expected graduation rate is and what the actual graduation rate was for 2014, that's when they're in the required audit and process. But all sites are certainly welcome to submit, and as part of the board process, you might remember recently making a decision that these audits would be done well in advance of A through F calculations so that schools could get feedback on their data ahead of time, and that this would be the one and only opportunity for them to do that. So we've encouraged all sites that are interested in having an audit to certainly submit their documentation. The window is open until April 24th, so they have a few more weeks to be able to do that. And if you have any questions, I'd be glad to address those.
And we'll continue to advertise that, so to speak, in the DOE dialogue and making sure that all schools know, reaching out to those who've actually submitted requests in the past, you know, to make sure that they know this is the cleanup time. So
I think Mr. Albert.
Yeah, Troy.
I just want to make a point as part of this is you're reviewing the kids that are no longer listed in your cohort and being able to provide that documentation. There is, you know, I understand the out-of-state situation, the homeschool state, but when they transfer within the state, I think the STN site and the RT reports should cover that. And I just would like to investigate that because that would eliminate number of students that I personally will have to look up. So it just would be a save of time.
Mr. Albert actually has the opportunity to participate in a required audit. And so
Based on the public. That was confidential.
Based upon our mobility, I will say that. A lot of the schools that will fill this out is based upon mobility.
right.
And
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
as a school that is, I would say, a mobile school, we accept all students that move into our district. We get them to the point where we do the best for them and we graduate them. I think this is a good process. It's just the fact that I think the ones that are mobile within the state and there is documentation that they are in another school, we should not have to provide that.
And Mr. Albert actually raised that during a break. I told him that was a great question. We certainly would go back and take a look at the STN App Center data to see if we could internally actually validate those without that being part of the audit. I might also add, just for your information, again, this is really looking at mobility, to Mr. Albert's point, that there are many schools that claim the students are missing, and so there actually is a formal process with the clearinghouse for missing children, and we actually receive an email from that location that we document for the school site if the child is literally missing according to the definition of the clearinghouse. So that's a more formalized process this year, and I thought you might be interested to know that as well.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
I believe we've already done the assessment update earlier in the meeting.
May I ask a question real quick? on
Sarah?
that? I know there's an assessment survey that has been sent out to the field and has a due date of April 3rd. I've heard some concern from people across the state that strongly overlaps with spring breaks and that might not be as accessible as
We had heard
we
that
would
too.
like.
We've
So-
actually extended it,
Okay, good.
and it'll go out again in the dialogue next Monday, and we've
Perfect.
extended for at least one more week.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. We'll also be, I might add, we'll be looking for superintendents to nominate teachers to work with us this summer on a variety of projects. So we're looking forward to involving more Indiana educators in the assessment process.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
No Child Left Behind waiver update. You received the report on where we are currently, and we have submitted our waiver as when it was due, yesterday, March 31st. So questions for Danielle? Seeing none. Strategic Planning Committee update. I don't think they've met, so I don't think there's any update. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. We are adjourned.
How about that?